Do you like badass women? Of course you do. Do you like whiskey? Of course you do. Do you like badass women that are in the whiskey industry? Well, let me tell you about one. Her name is Mary Dowling, and in today's Whiskey History, the Founders Edition, we're going to talk to you about Miss Mary Dowling, and it's a damn shame that not enough people know about this lady because she's a badass. And if I had a time machine, one of the people I would go back and see would be Miss Mary Dowling, and if I were to have a drink with her, it would be her Juarez, Mexico bourbon. Juarez, Mexico bourbon, you say? Yes, it's a thing. Pay attention. Born in Kentucky, January the 10th, 1858, Mary Dowling would marry John Dowling when she was 17 years old in 1875. He was 34, rocking that cradle, and he was working at a place called the Waterfill and Fraser Distillery. And by the 1880s, John had worked his way up to the point where the company was actually named Waterfill, Dowling and Company. They were mashing about 60 bushels per day, and on site they could store about 3,000 barrels. Doesn't seem like a lot by today's standards, but back then they had a really good whiskey product and they were churning out that whiskey. So popular, in fact, that by 1890 they were able to mash 250 bushels per day, and they had on-site storage for 21,000 barrels. And by 1900, John had 100% ownership of the distillery. At that time, he decided to bring in his brother Edward and his wife Mary to help run the operations. And this is where Mary's legacy begins, because just 2 years later, in 1902, her husband John dies at the age of 61, and she assumes full control of the distillery. And everything's going great for the next 20 years or so. In fact, in 1907, just 5 years after her husband passed away, she was a founding member of a bank in Kentucky, something that was damn near unheard of back then for a woman. And that was up until 1920 when Prohibition took effect, and Mary had actually applied to receive one of the medicinal distiller's licenses, but she was denied. So she thought, I'll just distill my own whiskey and sell it back to people later. So that's exactly what she did. She hid whiskey barrels all over Anderson County. So for the next couple of years, she's selling her illegal inventory to the distilleries who had these medicinal licenses, and she's also selling it illegally to people like you and me. God, I wish I were around back then. Everything's going great until 1924 when one of her bootleggers decides to narc on her to the government. And in 1925, Mary and 3 of her sons were convicted on conspiracy to possess and sell alcohol during Prohibition, so they appealed. And in a weird twist of fate, the stenographer who was taking notes during the appeal passed away, and no one could read his notes. So the circuit court decided to throw out the convictions, and Mary went free. And instead of going home and counting her lucky stars that she wasn't in prison, she phoned up her old buddy Joseph L. Beam, yes, from the Beam family, and they opened up a distillery in Juarez, Mexico. And over the next 4 years leading up to her death in 1930, Mary would continue to get her product into the United States, most of the time illegally. In fact, her distillery operated until 1963 and was one of the primary reasons why the law was changed in 1964 to say that bourbon must be made in the United States.